Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me this morning. I'm going to quickly rush through, I gabble at great speed, about a new initiative we're launching at Wellcome called Wellcome Open Research. It's a platform exclusively for Wellcome authors. You've got to be part of the Wellcome Club to use it. And it's a platform where our researchers can publish any results they think worthy of sharing. And that could be from a traditional research paper, a case study, a null and negative result, a protocol, the whole lot. And I suppose the primary motivation for doing this is one around making the whole process more transparent, faster, and it's in line with a number of other activities we're doing. So we're supporting things like open access through traditional author pays methods, making money available, eLife, and we're also involved in supporting preprint. So this is one of the mechanisms we're doing to try and encourage innovation in scholarly communications. When I started on this, I was a little bit skeptical about, is this really going to be a platform which our researchers would use? And then gradually I become more and more convinced of the value of it. And really they're the primary motivations for why a researcher I think might want to publish here. And the most relevant bit to today's session is because it supports, it's fast, so publications typically submissions are normally published within about a week. Because all what happens before publication is a series of integrity checks. So is the data there? Are all the authors listed on the paper actually authors of this paper? Has it been plagiarized? Various systematic sort of checks. And at that point, it's published. And all the peer review bit happens post-publication. And we announced this back in June, July, whatever. We opened our submission system a week last Monday. And we will publish our first tranche of papers Tuesday week. I think it's the 15th November. And what we're seeing from those very early submissions are very, very small numbers. I wouldn't say this is scientific at this stage. The N is too small. But we're seeing a whole range of different research publication types from a range of different researchers in a variety of disciplines, mainly obviously in the life sciences, but also some humanities. And a number of motivations for why they're publishing, and other times really tight. I'll just give you one story. Someone has an article coming out in the Lancet, and in the Lancet they were restricted to describing their protocol in, I think it was 300 words, so better than 140 characters, but still only 300 words. They felt they couldn't do justice to their protocol, so they're going to publish that on this platform. I won't go through this process, but in essence, an article submitted, goes through a peer review process post-publication, and reviewers do one of two things. One, they actually give a commentary on how the paper, I say paper, it's not a paper, how the thing can be improved. And remember, at this point, it has already been published, so they're not making decisions about that. They're talking about how they can improve it. And secondly, they assign it a status, either approved with reservations, or not approved. And before it gets indexed in PubMed, it will be published immediately, but it won't get indexed in PubMed when it has like 2 approved statuses or 1 approved status and 2 approved reservations. I'm rapidly running out of time. I'm not going to bother showing that slide. I've already said that. Let me just say, I suppose, why we've done it. I won't bother with that slide either. I think it obviously encourages, we fund all the research. We know that a lot of the research outputs are not published. We want them to be shared. We want to reduce waste. It shows also our support for openness and transparency, and we believe that's a way of really improving scientific progress. And you've only got to hear people like Joe Biden talking about his cancer moonshot and the value of having content open. It supports our view that researcher assessment shouldn't be based on proxies like journal name and perhaps impact factor, but actually on what the researcher has done, and metrics, article level metric, and also publicly available review comments. And I think by putting our name to this platform, it will encourage our researchers to try this, safe in the knowledge that we will assess that research in the same way as we assess any other piece of research. So I'm going to stop there, which is over by about 5 seconds. Apologies. Thank you.
Very good. Okay.
Okay. So my name is Joerg Heber. I'm the executive editor of Nature Communications, at least for the next 2 weeks still, before I start a new role. I'm talking about opening peer review at Nature Communications. sort of the background that we have at Nature is the editors operate independently. We are not part of a society. They don't do any research. We don't have an academic board of editors. And we take, obviously, reviewers' comments as advice, but also can overrule in terms of what we perceive to be the interest of our readers for a particular paper. And often what we experience, and what also my experience is, as a manuscript editor, is that our decisions are often based on really long and complex exchanges between reviewers and authors. And they're really interesting discussions that often can be really fundamental on a topic of a paper that is published. And yeah, it's just fascinating often to see the discussion that takes place before a paper gets published. And then there's also the problem, sort of from our point of view, that these discussions that take place, but they're only between authors and reviewers, and the paper gets published, and there's a bit of a black box of why did you publish this study, for example. And sort of it also there's often urban myths associated to our work, so we only publish papers unless all the reviewers are fantastically excited about them, which is not necessarily the case. So what we've done is, since 2016, since January, for all papers submitted since then, if the authors agree, we'll publish the reviewer comments and the author rebuttal letters as a supplementary peer review file. The reviewers have to agree to the potential publication of the reports, and we ask for a license to publish those reports when they submit the reports. We can do reductions if there's confidential unpublished data or anything like that, but it's really limited instances where anything is removed and it would be flagged up in the file. But also the authors take the decision about this scheme, whether they take part or not, at the acceptance of the paper. It's not a new idea. It's what's EGU, EMBO Journal, PeerJ, and others have done this for at least 10 years or longer. But we are sort of one of the first, certainly the first Nature-branded journal to implement this scheme. And an example, I just pulled out a paper by John because he's here. Yeah, it's referenced here. This is also quite nice because all the reviewers doing the peer review also signed their reports, and we would publish those signed reports with the names. That reviewers don't have to do it. They can remain anonymous if they like. Yeah. This is just another way of supporting sort of more openness. And the idea is also that the discussion that we publish, the rebuttal letters, the referee comments, also maybe help then in the post-publication peer review of the paper. People can look up what has been discussed during the peer review. Are there other issues in the paper, or are there things in a discussion between authors and reviewers that are actually interesting and worthwhile further discussion, or maybe lead to further research? In a way, what we're trying to do is, by publishing the peer review reports, opening up the process of discussion, because a lot of discussion has already happened before the paper even gets published. So we talk about post-publication peer review, starting a discussion on the paper, but what about all the stuff that went on before that? So by publishing those files, this is all out in the open, and hopefully then this can also lead to further stimulating discussion, or it's just of interest to the reader. So the first impressions that we have are very positive. As I mentioned, all the reviewers have to sign up to a potential publication of the paper. Obviously, if a study gets rejected, we would not publish the comments, but the reviewers don't know that when they sign up to this. So some of the reviewers decline, feel uncomfortable with their reports being published, but the vast majority is agreeing to the scheme. So it's so many that this is actually not a big problem for us as editors, that we can't find reviewers to do the job. So that impact is almost not there. Author opt-in is also very strong. There's areas in the life sciences that are used to this kind of open peer review that are a bit more stronger than others in the physical sciences, where that's not so common. But overall, the first impression is very positive. And I've also pulled out some comments. So yeah, one just said, I'm not a fan of open peer review. I'm not part of the Facebook generation. I mean, that's... but there's someone else who also said they're very enthused by it. That it creates more transparency, and this person also says it's the first time I'm actually also signing my peer review report under that circumstance. So I think that is a good thing. Yeah, and yeah, then there's others saying, okay, it compromises the quality of the peer reviewing, and others say it's fantastic. I have a 24-page rebuttal letter from a referee, and we can publish this all as now. So some of the files will be longer than the actual paper. Yeah, so the upshot is response from authors is really encouraging, and particularly also from areas where we were not so sure about, like in some of the physical sciences, what the response would be. We see it as a strong support of openness and transparency, and that it maybe also will lead to further uptake across other journals. And of course, what we do is a tweak of the existing peer review. This conference here is about coming up with new ideas for peer review. This is not a new idea. This is just a way of highlighting what the existing peer review can and cannot do and achieves. Thank you.
6 minutes, but I think we'll allow it because it was interesting. Okay, so ready, set.
Oh, go. Okay, so I'm Dr. Katherine Button. I'm going to be talking about results-free peer review, a new, well, not necessarily new, but a relatively new way of thinking about peer review that we've been trying, well, we will be trying with Biomed Central Psychology. So the idea is that we prevent flashy results from justifying poor methods. So, broken science, a thorny problem. We've got publication bias, a competitive research culture, all of which leads to questionable research practices and rather gloomy conclusions about the state of our literature. So how do we tackle this problem? Well, if we think about it as if it were a clinical problem, we could start thinking about the area of maybe we tackle publication bias. How could we intervene to reduce publication bias? So we know that decisions based on results equals bad science or bad biased literature. Decisions based on high quality, however, would be better. That might be a form of publication bias that is desirable because we'd like to see our literature full of the highest quality scientific evidence because those studies produce the most reliable results. So, solution, we should base editorial decisions on study quality rather than study results. But hang on a minute, aren't we already doing that in some of the journals that we have out there? Well, the problem is that if we don't hide results from reviewers, then knowledge of the results can confound our judgments of study quality. So let's suppose that a researcher runs a series of studies with 20% power. If you know my work on statistical power in neuroscience, you'll know that we love that number of statistical power. And we have an alpha level of 5%. If I find a null result, it's uninformative because actually I would have expected 80% of the studies to find null results because they're simply underpowered to be able to check findings. So as an author, I'm hardly going to bother writing that up for publication. But if I did, a reviewer would probably quite reasonably reject that based on the soundness of the study quality. On the other hand, I get a positive result. That's exciting. I might be able to convince myself as the researcher and then the reviewers that despite the low power of my study, my finding is worthy of publication because the chance of it being an error, a type 1 error, is perhaps only 5%. So while that sort of logic can maybe seem sensible for an individual study, you can see that it can become problematic when we consider a population of studies. And we're effectively allowing the results to bias our judgment of study quality. And we know that this happens because of work by early psychologist Mahoney in 1977, where he randomly assigned manuscripts with identical background and method section, but varied the nature of the result to a range of different reviewers. And he found that reviewers judged the quality of methods as twice as good if the result was positive than if it was null. So knowledge of the results really biases the way that we interpret methodological quality. And if anyone submitted to PLOS 1 with a null finding, you know that my experience has been that actually reviewers have been really critical of my null findings and found lots of reasons for methodological flaws that perhaps if the finding had been positive, they may have overlooked if it fitted with their theory or whatever. So, publication bias. We know we want to base decisions on the quality of results, but how do we do that and avoid the bias that's introduced retrospectively if we're aware of the results? Well, solution is results-free peer review. But does it work? And so this kind of talks about, refers to some of the things that were raised in the earlier session for those of you who are in here, is that we have lots of new initiatives in publishing at the moment to try and address these thorny issues of publication biases, but we don't have very good data on whether any of these interventions are actually producing the outcomes we want. So we need randomized controlled trials to evaluate these interventions to know whether we are actually intervening in a way that is reducing publication biases. We are scientists, after all. So I'm working with Biomed's Central Psychology to launch, I'm saying the first ever, but I did write this on the train, so it might be that it isn't the first ever trial, and please come and correct me in the lunch break if that's true. Randomized control trial to evaluate whether adopting a results-free peer review process actually reduces publication bias. How to measure the outcomes in such a study, I'd be really interested in any thoughts. And also, we're going to need lots of statistical power for this, so perhaps just Biomed's Central Psychology isn't sufficient enough, and maybe we could broaden this out across many other journals. So I'm always interested for potential willing participants. And that's me.
Ready to go.
Hi, I'm Andrew. I'm one of the co-founders of Publons, and I have a shirt here, nice Publons branded shirt, for the first person at the end of the talk who can tell me what Publons means and isn't Daniel Shanahan. So Publons is founded really to improve science and actually all of research by focusing on the core of research, which is peer review. Because really, as researchers, we have two jobs: is to conduct and publish novel research, but it's also to stand on the shoulders of giants, so interpret other people's research. But, and here's a clue to the name, due to the publish or perish nature of the incentive structures we build in research, we have this massive incentive to publish, but not really any reason to review. And that's resulted in all sorts of problems in research. So lots of submissions and lots of rejections, instances of fraud, but then at the same time a really slow review process and reviewer fatigue and all these problems that we kind of know about. And so we really think that we need to bring some balance back to the system, give people a reason to review, an incentive to review. And so that's what Publons does. It recognizes reviewers. So we collect peer reviews that are conducted for any journal around the world. We will help you as a reviewer to verify that you did those reviews, even if they're blind and unpublished. And then we'll give you something like a profile where you can put those reviews. So what you can see here is a profile of a user on Publons, and the result, the tweets and the comments that we get, where people say, now that I'm getting some sort of recognition for review, I'm enjoying the process and I'm much more likely to review. The key thing here is with a Publons record, it's 2 clicks to download something you can add to your CV and use in performance reviews and funding applications. And that's proven to be quite useful for researchers. Over 90,000 reviewers now use Publons. We have more than 500,000 reviews on the system, and actually thousands of editors as well have registered. 4 of the top 7 publishers in the world use Publons, and by the end of the year, more than 1,000 journals will be directly integrated into Publons to feed reviews across. So that's all great if you are already a reviewer, but a really common question we get is, how do I actually become a reviewer? If you're an early career researcher, there seems to be this disconnect where you know a lot about your field of research and you want to review, but you're simply not being asked. On the flip side, we've talked to a lot of editors who say that for them, the hardest part of their job is actually finding a reviewer who is qualified to do a review and will actually do it. So there's this weird disconnect between these two types of people in the research space. And the problem really is for an early career researcher is, how do I prove to an editor that I'm a good reviewer? And from an editor's perspective, how do I know if this potential reviewer is a good reviewer? So now typically, we wait until people have published a few papers and then kind of assume that that qualifies to be a reviewer. But we think there's a better solution, which is for early career researchers to provide a course and mentorship from your supervisor that helps you build a profile that shows that you can review. And on the flip side, allows editors to find a new source of motivated experts where you can actually evaluate their skills directly. And so that is the Publons Academy. So it's an online course, a free course of 10 modules, where you'll learn the specifics of how to peer review, and then specifically what different journals want in a peer reviewer. The idea being that if you're an early career researcher and you go through the Publons Academy, by the time you get to the end of it, you'll understand how peer review works. You'll have reviewed papers in your field, and you'll be endorsed by your supervisor. Kind of a signal that you should be a reviewer or capable of being a reviewer. So the idea is to take a profile like this and turn it into something like this, where an editor can immediately tell that you are a capable reviewer, and then to connect you with some of the thousands of editors on Publons so that you can start doing pre-publication review and build your career. So that's the Publons Academy. We've actually opened it up for pre-enrollments now. You can check it out, publons.com/academy. You can sign up, and very soon we'll be announcing the experts and the people who are actually helping us to develop this course. So that's Publons. Who knows what Publons means? There. Anybody else?
Gas publication online?
What gas publication?
Guessing, yes.
Oh, guest publications online.
Guessing publications online.
That's actually really good. I wish I meant that. So, some physics. We've got another one.
Publishing lots of new science.
Wow. These are both great.
Minimum of materials that you can
Who said that? Yeah. Yeah. So what was that? Sorry?
publishing minimum of materials that you can publish, not the whole lot.
Yeah, that's actually spot on. So in physics, we have electrons and photons, gluons, etc. The minimum unit of various things. So the Publon is the minimum unit of publishable material. It's a physics joke.
Okay, so we're being equally strict with the questions, I'm afraid. We do only have 5 minutes for questions. And we have a mic at the back, and the first one is over here down at the front. Can you please say who your question's aimed at and who you are, please?
David Cahoon, UCL. I think the idea of training people to do peer review is perfectly ridiculous. I mean, what you have to do to review a paper properly is to have a thorough understanding of the subject matter. If you're reviewing one of mine, you need to know about eigenvectors and stochastic processes. If you're reviewing a psychology one, you need to know about that. But you can't be trained in that by a course. This is something you learn as part of being a scientist. It simply won't work, I'm afraid.
Andrew, do you want to reply to that? Do you want to come up? Right on the spot.
So I absolutely agree. I think that's 100% spot on. There are really two things that go into doing a good review. One is like strong subject matter understanding, so being an expert in your field. And then the other thing is knowing how to actually construct a review and provide good constructive feedback. So the idea behind Publons is to find experts in the field who already have that subject matter expertise and find a way to prove it and teach early career researchers with that expertise to actually to do a good review. So I'm 100% agree.
Any more questions? Okay. Well, one here.
I just have one technical question that I asked on Twitter. The Nature Communications supplemental, the peer reviews as supplemental files. I think it would be great if we had an XML tag for peer review, and not just for that, but because I know EMBO, all the peer review reports are tagged as supplemental material, which is not very helpful for computers trying to read this material. And if you want to start giving people actually credit for doing peer review, which I think is absolutely the only way to incentivize peer review, we have to start finding ways for the computer to find out that peer review is being done and be able to track that. So we need robust XML tagging.
Yeah, I mean, again, I totally agree. So when we set up the scheme, it was set up as a trial. We wanted to test it out. Ideally, I mean, there could be so much more signed review reports. There should be DOI numbers. There should be citable. There should be an HTML. There should be marked up. There should be in databases. There's so many ideas that you can do. They need to be technically implemented, all these kind of things. But I completely agree. I mean, publishing it as a PDF file, it was easy because the rebuttal letters from the authors are also quite involved sometimes, and sort of transferring this into other texts is a bit more tricky. But in principle, it can be done, I'm sure. And also, as I said, by giving credits to reviewers when they sign their names and being able to do that, and also with citable items and so on, it's the way forward, I think, totally.
The microphone came just after you sat down, actually, but you were measuring the concerns people had and reasons why they weren't willing to sign their reports. And I was wondering how many of these, if you've got any plans at NatureComs to follow up with this and see if any of them are actually based in reason, shall we say. Because for open peer review, because we run a lot of these, some of the concerns people come up with, it's very hard to ever find an example of them being based in anything other than, I have a friend who knows someone who. And some of them do sound preposterous, but I would be interested if there is any evidence that maybe they're not. So, I mean, we don't really have much evidence as very few reviewers decline. Sort of the decline rates kind of correlate with the author, somewhat with the author opt-in rates that we see also varying across different fields. There are, like, for example, for small research areas, reviewers sometimes decline and say, well, we are such a small area, everybody will know who I am, even if the report is anonymous. So I think in response to this, yes, that's probably the case, but then the question is does there need to be a change of thinking happening in a community where, is it that bad if people know your name? And even if it's published or, public knowledge. I think that would be needed. In the meantime, I guess we have to respect that. Not everybody is feeling comfortable with that. Some of the discussions on a paper, I mean, some scientific areas become really specific and very specialized, so you can also infer probably sometimes the identity of reviewers. Although I have to say, on the other hand, there's so many authors emailing in and say, I know who my reviewers are, and give us as editor names, and in 80%, 90% of cases, it's just wrong. So the guessing games played by authors and then also played by readers, I don't know. It's also speculation. Thanks.
Thank you very much to everybody on the panel.